Welcome everyone. This is our third iteration of the stakeout, and the last one's topic, Explosion of LSTfi. I think it's just too big to not cover again, and probably a few more times afterwards. But I think the great thing is, getting some different perspectives from different folks at different orgs throughout the ecosystem. So excited to dig into conversation today. For those who are new, format for today is somewhat of a roundtable discussion. So, we have a set topics, questions that we'll go through. And at the end, if anybody listening wants to pop up, ask a question or join the conversation, we'll allot some time for that then. And feel free to put up your hand throughout, but we'll just save that for the end. So welcome to all of our guests. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Spadaboom, to kick us off.
Sweet. I was looking for like a funny introduction, like hostess with the mostest or, something like that. But I guess it's too early for you. Anyways.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Wonderful to have everybody. A few folks I've had the pleasure of spending time with, both in person and digitally. Others I haven't, but regardless, I want to keep the conversation pretty free flowing. And, if you want to dig into, or have a certain opinion around a certain topic or someone's opinion on said topic, don't hesitate to jump in. But as a person, that's been building in the space and been part of the space for a pretty long time, one of the most exciting things for me, at least, is really the explosion of, what ETH staking is going to do for DeFi. Obviously, us three in particular build in DeFi, so we're relatively biased, and I think it has a lot of implications outside of DeFi specifically. But I really think, over the coming years, we're just going to see hundreds and thousands of protocols and businesses and organizations, really building on top of the staking layer, and it's just going to have such a big impact. So, I'll kind of point the question or the first topic at Amit, at you, because, you're obviously deep in the weeds, building kind of a primitive around that staking layer and a few other things. But, where do you see ETH staking playing a role in DeFi? Like, what do you think the landscape's going to look like in a couple of years from now?
Thanks, Pada. Firstly, thanks a lot, guys, for having me here. And it's always a pleasure interacting with the Badger boys. I've had an opportunity to kind of meet them in person when I was back in the western part of the world. Really nice to meet again. So to get to your question, Pada, it's quite a loaded question. How does the LSD landscape look like in the future? I think it's one of the, just as an introduction, we are a liquid staking protocol that is present on multiple chains. Started out on Terra 1.0, right now on 6 chains, Polygon. We just launched ETH about a couple of months ago. Overall manage about $130 million of assets staked on our platform, over 40 plus DeFi integrations and ecosystem integrations across Ledger, MetaMask, etc. So getting into the question that you had asked, I think one of the liquid staking is probably a very fundamental primitive that has kind of emerged over the past couple of years. I think the way there are multiple partners or players in the ecosystem. One is the blockchains or L1s itself. The next one is the DeFi ecosystem around the liquid staking. And the third ones are all the other actors like validators and all the other players in the ecosystem, right? So liquid staking is the most easiest and most efficient way to bootstrap capital for any ecosystem, right? On ETH probably has the largest TVL coming from the liquid staking protocols, including the likes of Lido, RPL, CB, Coinbase, and like a bunch of other protocols, including us, right? And that capital is the most inefficient one, and it is actually being productively used across multiple DeFi primitives or DeFi Legos. So that's the most important thing for the ecosystem. And similarly for all the other L1s that are coming up, they are looking at liquid staking in a big way. So my fundamental belief is that like blockchains will probably launch in the future with liquid staking as the one of the primary primitives is how I look at the space. And obviously when it comes to ETH, where liquid staking and DeFi is miles ahead of any other ecosystem, we already have significant usage of liquid stake tokens across multiple DeFi Legos like uh, lending markets, DEXs, CDP protocols, uh, even for options and other derivative-based protocols, right? And this is not going to stop here. We are probably just 2 years into liquid staking. There's going to be like hundreds of different iterations and innovations that are going to be building on top. One such thing that I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with is what we are iterating on, which is called the liquid restake token, which is restaking and DeFi and LSTs. So it's the best of like all three worlds, obviously with its own risks and rewards associated with it. So yeah, so I know that was a long explanation, but I see that this is going to be a significant primitive in the future. And the innovation will not stop with what they are today. They can go in several dimensions that we can't even imagine at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is unimaginable. I agree that not only within the Ethereum ecosystem and the DeFi ecosystem within it, but it's kind of I don't want to say that we're in a space where you kind of take the successful predecessor before you and say, okay, I guess that's just how it works. Let's just do it like that, but a bit better. But I can see just with ETH going to proof of stake and what's already happened around that ecosystem, that it's going to be hard for new blockchains that come up to not look at that as part of the initial um, design and ideology of their actual um, architecture, right? And I could see that just being part of the blueprint moving forward, and that being, to your point, a key primitive. But I want to try to get a feel for like what does that look like on the perimeter a bit. Maybe Corn, you can give your perspective because I know with Yearn, obviously, being an aggregator, it's always about not one solution, but the ability to provide a value add to the users across a variety of different solutions. You guys have obviously come to the forefront with your YETH product, but how do you see do you see staking really have like being that foundational piece that everything else is kind of built on top of moving forward for DeFi, or how do you see it?
I do. So this whole journey with staking, well, the whole journey of like that validated staking being important to me was at the end of last summer, I went to the Digital Asset Summit in New York City put on by Blockwork. And it was a audience of like all Wall Street people in suits. I think like me and another guy from Abe were the only people in high wedding suits. And they had a liquid staking talk that was just focused on ETH. And it was definitely the most well attended talk of that whole event. The other talk were about like NFTs and other topics and stuff. And the Wall Street people were like, "Oh, this is of no consequence to us." But then, in one of the ETH staking talks, a guy from Morgan Creek Digital, and I can't remember his name, Mark something, he described like the concept of real yield that comes from ETH. It's going to the grocery store and checking out, and you give the cashier $10 and they light $3 on fire. And we spent some other time talking about how this is real yield and how this is an efficient and like usable way to even transact with yield generating assets. And there were a lot of people paying attention there. And that was a year ago. And they also predicted like this is not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a few years for this to catch on, but I can definitely see now how this has grown and how it is definitely catching on. A couple years ago, Yearn started to prove the model for yield-bearing collateral with like YVUSDC and YVUSDT. And there was a point where we had almost $2 billion of those assets used by Alchemix and Abracadabra. And that was like our first signal for product market fit, where this is a real thing that TradFi like doesn't have. DeFi has yield-bearing collateral that people can use in an efficient way. And that's really going to change the game. And like that audience of people who focus on, who live in the real world and like are not in DeFi yet, like they don't know about this yet. They don't really understand it, but it is simple enough for them to understand, and they will understand it eventually. So it's definitely one of the most important things that we're focusing on, and it's going to get beyond just Ethereum for LSTs, but that is definitely the focus today.
Yes, I love very much, Corn, how you've talked about the situation 1 year ago. And so, hi everyone, I'm MajeStyle. When we started building Gravita 1 year ago, there really was a problem of utility and adoption around LSTs. The narrative was completely different, even if we were in a much more, let's say, positive market. And there was, first of all, not a lot of use case. And now with something like Gravita that allows users to take interest-free loans against productive collateral like LSTs, we really see a shift in this direction. And we see how a CDP model like ours is definitely something that's extremely compelling for users and potentially at the center of a narrative that's going to build around these kind of products in the next cycle. And to imagine where the situation was even 1 year ago, and where we are now, where there is actually multiple opportunities to use LSTs around DeFi and have not only an interest-bearing collateral, but even great composability for debt tokens and stables. It's only a signal of where this has the potential to go in the right narrative and in the right cycle, especially in an environment that's even further attracting new users, right? Like a potential bull market. So I'm very excited for what the future holds, and LSTs on Ethereum will definitely be a new standard. I love both Stader and Yearn approach to this problem. And I think the fact that you guys were in a way, so early and building up the depths of these bear markets will position you guys very well to succeed. And as Gravita is trying to promote itself as a venue for empowering those minority LSTs, we are obviously looking at your products as products that we should include in our offering.
Well, you bring up a couple of interesting points that I want to speak to. So first, kind of Corn, to your point, I couldn't agree with you more as it relates to interest-bearing assets and the productivity of those assets. Like you can't give up the opportunity. Users don't want to give up the opportunity cost. And we saw like the first glimpse of it, right? We saw the glimpse of, people wanting to use and optimize the yield and the productivity of the assets that they already have. And during the bull market, the risk tolerance is much higher and people are doing crazy shit, and that's really was the acceleration of things like Abracadabra or Spell in particular, right? And we saw a glimpse of even with, some of the products that Badger built in the past with interest-bearing Bitcoin, it's hard to give up that opportunity cost. At the same time, a lot of those, if not all of them, were not sustainable yield sources. So, the initial fit of, hey, would you rather use an interest-bearing asset and do it in a permissionless way? And and get, all this legal infrastructure built around it, which is not possible in TradeFi. It's like check mark, yes. Now, how sustainable is that? Well, that was, the crux with.
You still there?
Oh, we lost you, Spot.
Yeah, he'll be back, I'm sure.
I presume he's walking around.
I think, like the yield back then were too high and not sustainable being that high. And today, I mean, our treasury yield artificial, well, yeah. There's always going to be like cycles of artificial yield that come around other than just like, yield from lending.
Yeah. Sorry. Can you guys hear me now or no?
Yeah, you're back.
My bad.
Yeah, you
Yes.
Yeah.
back.
Sorry. I
You
was
cut off at crooks. Thanks for
I
your
was
last word.
I was walking around. No. Yeah. The scalability of, ETH staking, I think is something that will blow, everyone's mind, both in DeFi and TradFi. And that's why, to your point around, the Digital Asset Summit last year, why people are getting so excited, because, arguably it could be the most sustainable and scalable source of yield of any asset of any class in the entire world that anybody on their phone can get access to with the click of a button. Right? Like, you think about it like that, it's like, holy shit. But we could obviously go down that rabbit hole, like, every minute of the conversation. But one thing I wanted to point out, based on what you guys all said, right? So, it's clear that, especially in the areas that you guys are building, there's pretty already immediate competitive landscapes and pretty aggressive competitive landscapes, right? If it's staked liquid stake tokens and that primitive, if it's liquid stake stable coin or back stable coins by liquid stake derivatives, or even if it's just how do I get better yield on my ETH in a trusted way, right? Like, how do you guys see, and maybe we can start with MajeStyle, like, how do you see being able to differentiate not only just your protocol, but like that competitive landscape that's inevitably just going to get, more and more aggressive?
So thank you very much, Spider. That's such a good question. And it's obviously something we thought about a lot. I think that clearly this being a big space and one that's poised to grow even more, there will clearly be a lot of users and different users will have different needs. I don't think that just the highest yielding product will win. I think that there will be a space for a lot of different products. And what we've seen is that there is a lot of interest and a very positive narrative around values in DeFi at the moment. So, of course, given that there is potential, maybe for, let's say 10 different LSTs to coexist and provide each different values to different users, I think that whether who's going to occupy those 10 places will be decided mainly by utility, by empowerment and value. And in particular, someone willing to solve these common pains. And in the end, someone also willing to keep in mind that the ethos of Ethereum is still around decentralization. And that's something that NFTs contribute a lot to. And then in terms of the landscape around Origin protocol and CDPs, definitely performance would be an important factor, and being one of the most productive places to use ETH is derivatives is something that's also important. And then let's not forget that after what happened at the end of the last bull market, how security is important. We at Gravita believe that trust is not assumed, but it needs to be earned. And for example, our decision to build on top of beta tested code like Liquid's one was something that in our idea could help users assume and trust us a bit more. And then in terms of the wider LST landscape. I really love how it's something that's evolving, how it's something that's already present now, and we can expect a lot of growth from this and a lot of different approaches, each with its own trade-offs and new results, and something definitely that's very interesting to follow at the moment.
Yeah, I agree that like integrity and security first and values and like, just call it on-chain reputation play a big role in, who users trust to use. I think, the stablecoin landscape and LST powered stablecoins, I think that's a really tricky one, not only because there's a lot of competitors, but also because you're kind of faced with this, uh, you know, interest rate from actually just keeping your dollars as dollars. That's pretty competitive, right? So the risk-free rate that people are looking at and the risks that come with smart contracts and DeFi, and we continue to see DeFi TVL going down and so forth and so on. I think that becomes, I think it's a pretty challenging, and, Amit and I talked about it actually in Toronto in person, just as it relates to kind of the same challenge with a variety of different liquid staked um, ETH derivatives being in market, all with different strategies, some having first mover advantage, some being more focused on decentralization, some creating a more robust yield environment with different token models like Frats has done. So that in itself, I think is also very competitive, and maybe that's a good way to point the question on it. Like, how do you think, um, in that given area, you're able to really, capture not just you guys, but LSTs will be able to capture market share and, come out of this thing, in the lead. Is it a winner take all? Is it, a bunch of different solutions for different specific value propositions are able to attract certain types of users? Like, how do you see that?
Yeah, I think it's a very pertinent question given the current market dynamics. I think so. There are several dimensions to this, right? Like, especially with a liquid staking protocol, you have what you're essentially building is a two-sided marketplace. On one side, you have the validators. On the other side, you have the users of the liquid stake token. Either they want to maximize their yields or they're just looking for staking yields while holding the token, or they want to actually get higher yields by taking active participation in DeFi, right? So the way we look at it is there are several problem areas that one needs to solve in such kind of two-sided marketplace uh, that we are trying to solve today. Like for example, on the validator side of the marketplace, today the barriers to entry for validators are significantly higher. For solo staking, it's about 32 ETH, which is close to 50K, 50K plus thing. Similarly, with another large competitor, it's about 10.4 ETH. And we have reduced the barriers to entry to almost 4.4 ETH, which is a significantly lower number. And with the emergence of technologies like BVT, etc., we believe this can be further lowered to close to about 1.5 to 2 ETH. And that will actually increase the yields that these validators are able to make close to double digit, maybe 9 to 10%, right? While our typical staking rewards are close to 4 to 5%. So that's the problem that we are trying to solve on the validators side of the marketplace. And we've seen like tremendous success in the initial days itself. We have about 135 unique node operators spinning up more than 450 to 500 validators already just in a month. On the user side, however, obviously players like Lido have solved key problems with regards to DeFi integrations, etc. However, we believe there is still a large market outside that wants diversification and even access. Lot of wallets, lot of exchanges today. They don't have any particular option for liquid stake assets. So that's a key market that is wide open. And even some of the retail market is actually looking for players who can provide similar rewards as Lido or other DeFi integrations, yet want to diversify because they don't want to stay staked with a single protocol, right? So that's the beauty of the space that we are we are building in, and obviously it has challenges. It has certain modes that that the early movers or large protocols kind of inherit.
Thanks for digging into that. I think that the the ability to look at it in those lenses, right? The multiple marketplace kind of perspectives, speaks to a lot of the times what I think folks are going to jump to start overlooking, which is, the validator side. And I think Rocket Pool has done a good job in, being able to spend, a pretty significant amount of years focusing on that side and building out that to then help empower, its ability on the other side to drive interest and more importantly, integrations, which has proven, I think, so far, and this is again super early days, but integrations have proven to be the stickiest way for anybody, um, any LST protocol to really not only help grow the utility of that given asset, and I think utility is king, but also just ensure that people are not just going to hop to the next hottest thing, right? I think we've seen that in DeFi during the bull market. Corn could probably speak to it from a Yearn perspective because I know on the Badger side, from a building yield aggregation product, you're only as good as your yields, and if you can't sustain a high yield, then the mercenary capital jumps ship. But how are you guys? Maybe that's a good segue, Corn. Like, how are you guys thinking about further building a competitive product? Is it this idea that there's going to be so many users don't want to have to choose. They just want an easy way to kind of maximize their yield and let, a protocol do the work for them. And then do you see like, the need for YETH, for example, to get deep integrations to create that level of stickiness, or how do you guys think about it?
Well, the level of stickiness is definitely going to depend on your usefulness, or basically like your channels. Where can it be used? And using it to mint stables in the CDP is perfect. We have taken the basket approach, and Stader is on this journey with us. They're one of the first 5 to be part of YE through our YE creation event that we did. Imagine that there's a basket of centralized exchanges back in like 2022, and call it YSEC. And in it, we have like Binance, Coinbase, Huobi, FTX, Kraken. Now, try to sort that from best to worst before the FTX implosion. Like, what weight would you put on FTX? Would you think that that's a safe place to put your money compared to Binance or Huobi or Kraken or Coinbase? And that's kind of the thesis that we took with creating this, that there are different risk profiles, and you don't know those risks until something bad happens. So, would you rather hold 100% of your money in one, or, uh, weigh it out into multiple places? So that's the approach that we took to YE. And the next step of the journey for YE is to prove its usefulness and to develop those channels and to have it be used as collateral.
So collateral, I think the collateral piece is like we think about that for EBTC, right? So, with EBTC coming to market in the fall after a year plus of development and doing everything that we've been doing on the security side, for us thinking about integrations is obviously really critical. But there's always this chicken before the egg situation where your own the risk tolerance when you're building smart contracts, or that risk profile is only going to be as good as those smart contracts, or excuse me, it's only going to be as minimized as the smart contracts time in market. So you kind of have to be in market for a period of time, prove out, which is never really proven, right? Look what happened with Balancer yesterday, the day before, and Curve a few weeks ago, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's never quote unquote safe, and that's just part of the risk curve. But in general, there is that catch-22, and I think that's a challenge that a lot of protocols are gonna face. And in the bull market, it was kind of easy, right? Just everyone would just throw a bunch of coins on top of stuff and like come up with like some type of staking and locking mechanic for those tokens. And if the token prices went up, everything looked good and everyone was happy and blah 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 blah. But that was obviously unsustainable, and that came crumbling down pretty quick. But yeah, I see that as being a challenge, for everyone here, right? If it's for Gray, if it's for, or excuse me, Gray, if it's for ETHX, if it's for YETH, if it's for EBTC, it's trying to drive that level of adoption so that TVL grows, market cap grows, which in and itself makes it easier to sell, these protocols on integrating it, coupled with time and market, and being able to do that without the excitement of, oh, token go up, right? It's a big challenge, and I think that's a lot of the times where product market fit for any protocols or products that are built is truly difficult, and people overlook it, and people point to certain numbers and be like, look at this, like. But the reality is being able to accelerate. I think all of us here could speak to, building protocols that accelerate to hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars relatively quickly. But how does that change when, the excitement of the market goes away? Or things that were being built on top of kind of went out from under us, right? Without a lot of their control, if that's, Terra, or if that's RemBTC, or if that's Curve, or if that's whatever, right? So I think that's going to be a challenge for anyone building, LSD oriented products. At the same time, I think the reward that comes with it is that the economics and the interesting ways to create new products that don't need those extraordinary incentives, but can repurpose and reutilize the foundational and scalable ETH staking yield, gives an opportunity for protocols like all of ours, I think, to build things that actually could have that fit and serve and solve a specific need, right? But again, I think it's a big challenge, and I think there's going to be a lot of people that try and they're just not able to do it. I don't know if you guys agree or disagree with that, that train of thought.
I just hope people do it safely. Like when you start getting into like looping yield and baskets of baskets and well, there's systematic risk there for sure, especially when it comes to like unwinding those strategies when need be.
Well, that's actually a good, because this is one thing I wanted to bring up, but like when it comes to liquid restaking tokens, I think that's some of the folks that have been a little bit more critical around the opportunity around associated with it, speak to the systematic risk. Like, how do you guys think about that? Like, do you think, having a layer now on top of, like, if you have LSTs going into restaking protocols, and then those said restaking protocols have liquid derivatives of those deposits that are then integrated in these other places, and then those integrations crumble or something happens around that obviously affects everything underneath it. Like, do you think that risk is too high, or do you think, it's just going to be the proliferation of like more on top of more on top of more on top of more?
Very interesting question. So I think the way we think about it is, obviously we're not thinking about it in an irresponsible way, and that is going to hurt the ecosystem in general. But we fundamentally believe that there's an opportunity in this market because, unlike lending, staking is a very different kind of a model, right? When you are actually staking your assets, the risk of slashing is typically very minimal, as we have, like, I mean, if one looks at the data closely, the number of times or the amount of slashing events and the slashed capital is extremely rare. Now, what are the risks of restaking, right? Like, one is the smart contract risk of the underlying platform itself, and potentially the smart contract risks of the services that are utilizing the restaking services, right? So smart contract risk is something that one has to, that the restaking DAO or the liquid restaking DAO has to really understand before they whitelist a particular this particular service for liquidity staking, right? So that is something that is mitigatable. That is something that time and again people smart contracts get hacked and there is risk with it, but it's not an unknown. It's not a significantly unknown risk. Obviously, one cannot for 100% certainty say that there is no smart contract risk despite multiple audits, but it's a mitigatable risk. The other risks that one keeps talking about is like, what are these risks of concurrent slashing events where one LST's validators get slashed and then there is another slashing event for a service, etc. But these risks are mathematically really, really low. In theory, these can have certain probability, but the probabilities itself are like really, really low. So the risks that are associated with this kind of an opportunity are manageable and mitigatable risks is our fundamental belief. And that's why we're pretty kicked about this particular space and the opportunity that it could potentially present.
I really like your answer, Amit. I would just add one more element because, I've seen protocols that build baskets of LSTs or leverage over censorable collateral, right? And, or censorable assets. And this is something that in Gravita we've been looking at. And definitely most of the LSTs are not censorable, but some are. And it's important for users to be aware of that because suddenly they can find themselves leveraging on something that a centralized entity can block from a distance without them knowing, maybe because it comes from some illicit funds or simply because they're just forced to do that. And so for everyone building in this space, and especially for users using those products, I would say that I'm not against, the experimentation around those composable leverage products, but as long as they are built out of assets that are not censorable in any way. And in the NFT space, there are some well-known assets that are censorable, and it's important to be aware of that.
I'm going to speak very openly to this because we've spent like a year building a protocol with the intent of having it be as decentralized and censorship resistant as possible. And I think, and this is what kind of frustrates me sometimes. It's not necessarily what you said, but in general, people tend to speak about certain LSTs as if there are some that are not censorable, when the reality of the situation is some might be more decentralized at the node level, some might be more decentralized in other ways, but there is a point of centralization, if that's the actual LSD or T contracts and some of the upgradability rights of those contracts, or some of the reliance across the board on Oracle infrastructure or that type of stuff. But there most certainly is a point of centralization and censorship that can be brought to the forefront with all LSTs, and I think that is, and that's why I support kind of what you suggested to Amit about like taking that into consideration as part of the risk profile, because today those aren't mitigatable, right? Those aren't things that we can avoid because your decentralization or censorship resistance is assumed by the entire stack that it's being built on top of. And I think, again, that's something that's not talked about enough. But even as we went through the exercise of saying, okay, we want to build something that's as censorship resistant as possible. Well, number one, being a CDP protocol, there is Oracle reliance. So right there and then, you break the ability to be completely decentralized. And then, second to that, and this is kind of part of our decision process, we actually started the journey trying to make a protocol that allowed you to borrow Bitcoin in an immutable way, in permissionless way, off from ETH and ETH only, because that was the way to really enforce a level of decentralization and censorship resistance at the protocol. But then when you have to compromise on the Oracle, and then you look at the opportunity cost, you then might as well assume some of the other censorship or centralized risks that come with having LSTs underneath the hood. I don't know if you agree or disagree, but that's something I think is important.
Oscar,
Absolutely, yes. So I just want to make a distinction between centralization and censorability, because to me they're a bit different. Like, decentralization is a journey. It's a bit difficult in this environment to assume like some advocates that either you are decentralized or you're centralized. It's a bit of a gray area, and definitely to me more of a journey in general. So one can start centralized and then have a path towards decentralization. And I think a lot of protocols have had a great move in this regard. To me, when something is censorable, though, like it's hard to make names because it's also stuff I love. But let's make the example of stable coins like USDT and USDC. It's for a protocol like Gravita, especially in our earliest stages, definitely a bit more of a difficult decision to accept something like USDC as collateral, because if a user comes in with 5 million and means some gray against that, and then Circle decides that these 5 million cannot be used anymore because they were used illicitly and they are forced to do that, then we have bad debt in our platform, right? And I think that this, especially for maybe Yearn and you guys at Badger, is something to consider. And I think that your choice was very good. And the way you're moving forward about it is really one I love. And definitely also there have been talks inside Gravita about composability, because, for example, the main BTC product on DeFi right now is wrapped BTC, and eBTC seems in every way to be a superior asset, and something like wrapped BTC as collateral on a platform like Gravita would definitely have a bit of a tougher time existing due to its censorability at the core. So hence this difference that's important for me, and not at all a critic to anyone present here, really, just something to keep in mind as a user. Especially when they're looking to borrow against something, and especially even more when they're doing leverage strategies that then can have a very hard time being unwounded.
Well, I think that kind of lends itself to, a topic that I wanted to talk about, which was how important is decentralization. I mean, maybe we could start with you because, you're building an LST or LSD protocol. Like, how important is decentralization and the factors that you need to consider when building? Because I think, MajeStyle, to your point, right, it is a journey, and, being as decentralized as humanly possible from the start comes with its own risks, right? Like the technology that's being built and the infrastructure that's being built is so immature and new, and even the languages that this stuff is being built using, like what we saw with Curve and Viper, like there's so many unknowns that losing out on the agility to act quickly and respond to that unknown becoming a reality is part of the risk profile of being exceptionally decentralized from the start. So it definitely is a challenge. But when you think about decentralization at the LST level, I mean, how do you guys think about that? And like, where's decentralization the most important? Is it in the actual liquid stake token? Is it in the infrastructure underneath that for validators? Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and there's no easy answer to it. Obviously, the existing liquid staking protocols have done their fair share of decentralization, some to a greater degree and some to a lesser degree. But I think decentralization, like MajeStyle pointed out, it's actually a journey. It's not a. Obviously, it's easy for somebody to expect that a protocol is decentralized and everything's hunky dory on day one, but that's not the case, right? It's decentralization while it's very important, but it comes with its own trade-offs, right? Decentralization is very, very expensive. Like, for example, running a decentralized Oracle network to bring data from the beacon chain to the execution chain is extremely expensive with the current infrastructure. Similarly, running permissionless nodes or permissionless validators and enabling all the infrastructure necessary to ensure that the bad actors do not act in the act in an unfair way or in a harmful way is also important. Then that comes with its own risks as well as costs. While decentralization is desirable on day one, it's not easy. The way we think about decentralization is like multiple other areas. It's a multifaceted problem. On the validator side or the node operator side, censorship and decentralization is extremely important. One should be able to spin up a node permissionlessly, like how they do it with a typical Ethereum validator. That's very important to us, and that's core to us. And accessibility is a problem that we are solving there, where by reducing the capital entry barriers with our existing technology as well as with DVT. On the other hand, when we talk about the overall protocol itself, ability to govern the protocol in a decentralized manner and make any necessary smart contract upgrades or changes in a decentralized way is also super critical for us. Today, we have a community-owned multi-sig with 6 on 9. Soon, we are going to be moving to a DAO controlled smart contract upgrades. That's one part of the decentralization journey. And the other important part of the decentralization is actually on the Oracle network itself. Today, we have a permissioned set of 7 node operators who actually do the Oracle duties. Now, decentralizing that is another important journey, which is going to be critical for a decentralized protocol. So, like depending upon the type of a liquid staking protocol, the facets of decentralization are going to vary, and expecting that on day one is definitely not, obviously, while one can expect, but it comes with its own risks and significant overheads. So one needs to take these things into account before we actually before one embarks on this journey.
Yeah, it's really challenging. Like the corn, how do you so taking the basket approach, arguably every additional, so there's like two sides to the argument, right? Some people might say every additional LST that's added increases the risk profile because one bad apple affects the bunch. Some suggest that having more reduces the risk since there's not one central point of failure. We obviously went through that exercise and decided to limit our collateral capable of borrowing or minting eBTC to just one asset and one asset only, and then removed all the governance parameters. To your point, I tend to, we've been on one side of it where, governance, DAO governance, managed smart contracts actually became much more inefficient and more risky than just removing governance as a whole around those smart contracts to introduce any human intervention, and instead the risks are assumed by those users that are interacting with the protocol, but humans can't really change any of the parameters throughout the life of those deposits. But Corn, when you guys think about integrating a new LST, like how important is decentralization, or how do you think about decentralization in a decision-making framework?
So our governance has nothing to do with Yearn governance. All of the staked YETH holders are the ones who decide the weight, or even if a new LST can become part of the basket. It's a tough question, and there's obviously like no human yes or no available in the design of YETH, and we're just going to find out together if the staked YETH holders are incentivized enough to participate in governance, and we think they will be with the like epic 1 month epics and the ability to increase or decrease the weights based on the incentives they're providing each epic. This mechanism is really like a ship that we've built, and we are setting it out to sea, and it's going to do stuff we don't know which direction it is heading in yet, though.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with how YETH is structured, but it's basically like just an advanced curve pool, like a 3 curve pool. And there's a bunch of assets in there, and you can mint or burn, redeem those assets at any time based on the weight. Or if you wanted to, like, just like in 3 curve, if you want to take out USDT and the weights are favorable or not favorable, you get a bonus or you get a penalty. It's the same thing with YETH.
Yeah, I'm familiar. It's very similar to how we designed IBBTC a few years ago.
Mhm.
So most certainly, in the know around some of the trade-offs there. But yeah, I think the setting this ship to sea is a good analogy, because I think all of us here could agree that you don't know what you don't know, right? And this is so young and so early. Everything is a path, and you kind of have to learn, through that journey to help inform some of your decisions as a builder, and the influence on the design of the protocols that you are able to contribute to help build moving forward. And I think, anyone that's been through an exploit or a critical type situation, MajeStyle, I don't know if you have either, I know with Gravita you haven't, but maybe in your past life, I know Amit and Korn have been through it. Obviously, we've been through it, and it teaches you a lot, very, very, very rapidly, and you just think about things, quite a bit differently. And I think it 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 pushes you to kind of ask some harder questions around those design decisions. And I think, at least for me, um, and for the longevity or the long-term trajectory of whatever protocols are being built, outside of finding a fit, which product market fit, which in and itself in this space is extremely difficult, building something that can stand the test of time, it is a goal. And I think the decentralization and the censorship resistance, more importantly, of whatever that asset is, if that asset's a basket, if that asset's a synthetic asset, if that's a stable coin, if it's a liquid stake token, I think that that's something that we all shoot to try and make a reality. But of course, you don't know how rough the waters are going to be when you go out to sea. So you kind of have to just prepare the boat the best that you can, and go out there, right?
Yeah, I think for someone to do something malicious to the basket, they would have to put up a lot of capital, and it would have to be a pretty complex operation. I don't know if that could happen.
Well, let's not talk too much about that stuff, but
I'm not scared about talking about it. I'm not at all Spada. You got to put it out there.
yeah, fair enough. Well, that might also be a plug for Y Academy audits. I don't know. I don't know if that's where you're trying to get me to say, Cord. I don't know if that was the case.
No, I really wasn't.
I know you
But
weren't.
I do run operations for Y Audit.
That's great. So guys, I'm just looking at the time. It's 5 past the hour. Maybe we'll wrap it up with this kind of last question here. It's kind of an overarching question, and we'll go around the horn. It doesn't seem like there'd be many questions from the audience. So, like, what do you guys? What excites you most? And let's try and take off our own bias. Like, let's take off our bias here. Like, I think, MajeStyle, you might say like the evolution of stablecoins, or I might say, the proliferation of ETH and BTC working together finally. But genuinely, when you think about ETH staking, or staking in general, not just ETH staking, like, what excites you guys the most? And feel free, anybody, to kind of kick it off.
I'll go first. I'm most excited about the point in time when like a retail audience or people in traditional finance look at the dollars in their wallet or whatever currency they have, and they're like, why isn't this yield bearing? Why isn't this generating interest? Why can't I use this? And that's the point in time when they figure out like what ETH staking is and LSTs are.
It's actually losing a yield just by sitting there because of inflation, right? And yes, I think at the end, the core reasons why we're all in crypto, they're still obviously there, right? And we're still early, in this narrative around this next cycle, but in a broader context, we are like so early compared to traditional finance adoption and so many other things. We still have a lot of UX work to do to onboard more people, but it's just so exciting to be here already, right? And to be part of this. And one thing I'm very interested in seeing is, one thing that we don't know, right? We can make suppositions about what the next narratives will be, but I'm very curious to see, what will be the narrative around the next cycle, the next cycle of adoption. It's clear that, around a few months after the halving of Bitcoin, there is some excitement and some interest around crypto. And so I really think that LSTs will be playing a big role, but I wonder, what else, right? And sometimes when you expect something, it's actually when you're more easily surprised by something else that ends up happening. And so, yeah, personally, that's definitely where my attention will be in following narratives and in seeing how all these, I would say, more financial savvy new generation approaches stuff. Seems to be very interested in crypto. Seems to be, a generation of users that is also maybe a bit more cautious with values and less with pure performance. And I'm interested to see where this all will lead in the next 4 years, let's say.
I think for me, there are several areas in crypto that are quite exciting. Apart from liquid staking and restaking and all the liquid restaking, the real world assets, bringing those on chain and creating accessibility to a lot of billions of users who currently don't have access to quality financial products. That is something that really excites me, and I hope we're not too far away from that distant future.
Not for nothing, I was gonna say the same thing. So we didn't coordinate that answer, I promise you. But no, in all seriousness, accessibility is, one of the reasons why I got into crypto almost 10 years ago, right? The ability for anybody, anywhere, at any time to have the same access to financial products that, a lot of people are privileged to get in the first world. And even then, in first world countries, you have to jump through hoops and it takes forever and it's a pain in the ass. And God forbid, the word crypto is used in a conversation. But yeah, I too think that that couple, I really think those are going to be some of the major drivers, right? I think the proliferation and utility of staking and how that impacts protocol designs and the ability to have, again, sustainable interest-bearing assets, coupled with the ability to bring, some of the things that you want to have access to, right? You want to have access to 4 or 5%, on a stable coin as an example, or on dollars in your bank account, but being able to do that and do it in a way where you get all the efficiencies of being able to LP it, being able to do more unique strategies because of its composability. I think it's just the accessibility is going to be through the roof. I think it's going to build a stronger foundation for DeFi as a whole, because naturally, bringing those assets on chain brings a bit more sustainability. And then you combine that with what I think will continue to be this proliferation of, ETH being looked at as like ultra sound money, as some would say, is very exciting. So, with that, I kind of wrap up by saying, guys, thank you so much for joining. It was wonderful to just chat and hang out with you guys. I don't think we get to hang out enough. Hopefully I get to see you guys in the fall in person in some of the events and conferences that are kicking around. But if not, let's take an opportunity to find a time to chat. And yeah, thanks for joining. Appreciate it.